Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are joining us here. Welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. Yes, we have kind of taken a break from a number of the books that we have been reading, but we're back. We're back with more reading and more reflections. We have decided to pick a brand new book to go onto the journey. But before I tell you more about the book, we have one new member who has joined us on this Pages to Progress journey. Matt, I want to welcome you to the madness, to the craziness, to the excitement. Thanks for joining us on this. I hope that you find some fulfillment as we also find some fulfillment in what you have to share and bring to the table. So we appreciate that. We appreciate that. Dee, as you have been watching our episodes, you're probably familiar with, and John, you're probably familiar with. So we're looking forward to dive straight in. So maybe I'll start with John. Could you show us the book? This is our book that we're going to dive straight into, The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer. You're welcome to join us on the journey. On this YouTube, you'll be able to see in the comment section the link to the book, and you'll be able to follow along with us. This week, we're going to start with the first 3 chapters. We're going to give some reflections on those 3 chapters. And then we're going to continue moving on for next week, the next 3 chapters, and so on. And we'll keep you updated on the process. So without further ado, why don't we dive straight in? We've all read the first 3 chapters. I'm sure we have a few things to say on those chapters. We're going to kick off with chapter 1. I'm going to attempt to give a very brief summary about chapter 1. And then we can dive into a few things. At least for chapter 1, for me, in terms of my response, I think chapter 1 is trying to tell us that the kind of God that you believe in is the kind of God that you ascribe him to. What do I mean by that? I mean, it depends on the kind of God you create him to be in your mind. If you create him to be an infallible being, then that will determine the kind of God that you believe in. But if you decide to create a God based upon your infallibility, then that will also logically extend to the kind of God that you end up articulating. That's what I think chapter 1 is predominantly about. And I think a lot has to do in this chapter about the creation of idolatry, but we'll get onto that. And I'm wondering what everyone's thoughts are on this. Let's start with this, and this is my kind of springboard. I think A.W. Tozer is trying to get us to understand that the way that we describe God and the way that we have fashioned him based upon our own belief system and the way that we think can lead us into problems, because essentially that means that we are trying to create him into our own image. That's how I read what A.W. Tozer presented. What do you guys think? Do you think I'm accurate? Is there anything to add to that? Anyone?
No, I think you're totally accurate. We're limited as created beings in so many ways, and we're limited by our life experiences. And that is often reflected on our experience with God. And I think you see it a lot as, when you look at God as the father figure, and you look at so many failed father figures that we have in this world, some people just aren't able to wrap their mind around God as, our father, so to speak.
Right.
And maybe we would do better as God as our mother, but the Bible is so paternalistic. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really give us that option, even though there's no reason why it couldn't be an option.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with that. What about you, Dee or Matt? Did you resonate with the idea of the creation of God in our own image?
I think that all of us to some extent do that. I think that definitely, through the Bible, the scriptures, and we get to know God. But how we relate to God and the relationship that we end up having with God is, I think, so dependent on how we see God, right? I think even though the Bible teaches one thing, but sometimes I don't know if it's I don't know if it's driven by, I think it's driven by belief, but at the same time, maybe driven also by some of the life experiences that we have, that we obviously that we attribute to God, or we point to God for some of the experience that we have. So I think that this book raising the question about what is God like to you as an individual, as a follower of Christ, is really important question to ask. I think it's really important question to every single person who is a follower of Christ. And be able to really feel comfortable, or maybe not necessarily have to comfortable, really be able to answer that question. And I think it'll help you to dive into why you feel the way you do, or why you have the kind of relationship that you have with God.
It's not a comfortable question though, because it really forces you to wonder whether what you have believed is correct at all. Yeah, anyway, that's some of my thoughts. Matt, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm, going from kind of the preface in chapter 1, to be honest, left a lot of questions in my mind. I think there was a lot of, he does kind of some good hinting, I think, about as far as what a solution possibly is here. I'm still waiting kind of for what is his problem statement? Like, what are we addressing here?
Right.
Was something that kind of stuck out in my mind. I think the stuff that he kind of hints around here in chapter 1 about, our ideas of God being, buried underneath rubbish of conventional religion and things like that. And the lack of, I guess, viewing a high view of God. I'm totally down with, I totally get, but I'm still kind of searching for, like, he raised more questions than he actually settled for me as far as what is he trying to address in this book? What is this problem statement?
Yeah,
I totally agree with Matt. In a lot of ways, A.W. Tozer is a modern day Paul, who if you spend a lot of time and you go slowly, you can kind of figure out what he's trying to say, but he has a depth and a wordiness that is a little bit frustrating, because it never feels like he actually comes out and says what you're wanting him to say.
It reminds us of someone that we read before, John. C.S. Lewis.
Well, yeah, there you go. It's another one.
Yeah.
Well, there was even, like, Lewis kind of came to mind that I was looking for the way that he was writing, the way that a lot of this flows. It seems like it's looking for an argument. He writes in a very argumentative, academic style. I feel like in some ways C.S. Lewis probably comes out and actually says, like, progresses through some of the arguments. Here it was kind of like we jumped in the middle, but where are we starting? What are we trying to address here? So
he did take a kind of like an accusatory form, especially when he went on and on about the low views of God, as if to say that I've been guilty of doing this. And to a certain extent, I think to some degree I have. And here's where and again, we're only at the start of the book, so I can't really come to the full conclusions, but here's where I kind of backed off a little bit. And I was like, hang on a minute. Because on one hand, he was seeming to argue that I don't always recognize the supremacy of who God is, and the power and the awe and the majesty of who God is. But you know what? On many different levels, the way that my relationship with God has become, I actually connect more to the friend of God than I do connect to some kind of lofty, distant. I'm not saying he isn't. I'm just saying I relate to more.
So what do you mean by the friend?
I mean the friend as I'm coming into your house, open up your cupboards and taking your food and putting my feet up, John, kind of friend. I mean the dress down. I mean there is a way that I even speak to him, which is just so relaxed, and it's not very our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thine. There isn't a script. There isn't a.
I was going to say, is your friend's name Jesus?
Yes, he is. Whoa. I
in
don't
a
know.
lot of ways, a smaller, more manageable piece of God. Yeah, not to be totally crude, but still something that challenges us, even in the Gospels when you see him, but certainly someone we can approach, as opposed to who A.W. Tozer is describing, at least in the preface, with this majesty, this person where we can't even, conceive of, because we're so sinful, we're so full of idolatry, just the opposite of majesty, that we don't even have a connection we can begin.
Definitely. I think that's a lot to think about. The idolatry. Sorry, go on. You wanted to mention?
No, I do think that church or religion as a whole, society as well, absolutely has moved away from seeing God as the supreme, all-powerful being to very much that friend concept. And there's nothing wrong with this friend concept, because I do agree. I see Jesus as my friend, as well. But when you bring, I think that what he's trying to say is that because we brought God down to our level so much, we've lost all that respect and awe toward God. And that had a detrimental, I think, effect on how the relationship that we have with God, and how we, even down to how we, I guess, I don't know if I want to say how we preach or how we share about God. It really has, I really think overall it has brought down.
That I have to agree with. I do have to agree with. I think there are many instances where I can hold myself guilty where we minimize God, and when we don't see him in that perspective. So to transition from chapter 1 to chapter 2, I think that conclusively he's trying to say is you can't define God. And which is fair enough. I to some extent agree to that. And God is only as big as the biggest thought you have about him, and you are going to be limited to that. I think that he said that somewhere in chapter 1. In chapter 2, I think his running conclusion is, in a nutshell, the incomprehensible God has revealed himself ultimately through the revelation of Jesus Christ. And that's what he's trying to seemingly bring across. Am I accurate in my summary? Is there anything else? Do you feel that would sum up chapter 2 better, guys? Anything to add to
that? Love this. I love the whole he's writing on the language of resemblance. How when the prophets were describing the heaven and God and all that was pertaining to the heaven, like they really could not really define what it was that they were seeing, and they had to use the word likeness, what it appears to be, as if it were. Yet at the same time, he also makes a point that even though it's described in that way, I think that us as readers and as listeners and as we experience God, we get it. Like we understand it in our heart, like spiritually we understand, right? And I think, and that's what's wonderful about having a relationship with God and having that spiritual mind.
And I like that he kind of said that longing to know what God is like, even though we can't describe it, is a godly thing. And that on page 19, the last paragraph, the first sentence, he says, the yearning to know what cannot be known, and that's a capital W and what, to comprehend the incomprehensible with a capital I, to touch and taste the unapproachable with a capital U, arises from the image of God in the nature of man. So it's a God-given desire to know what God's about, even though we aren't ever going to be capable to totally know what God's like.
Yep. So here's a question that popped into my mind as I was reading this, and I'm still pondering on this. He talks about discovering the incomprehensible God, and he presents the idea that Jesus is the answer to that revelation. He also presents the idea that the Bible is a tool that helps. I think it's on page 20, if I can get this correct. I wrote it down here. Page 20, the Bible is, well, he never said the Bible is. I'm ascribing the Bible to be darkness to the intellect, but sunshine to the heart. I stole his quote and I've repurposed this quote to say that that's what I think would be an accurate representation of what the Bible is. Darkness to the intellect, but sunshine to the light. And I think this journey isn't about collecting data to scientifically work out our claims by looking at things in the Bible, but rather it's about the opening of our heart as it calls back to its main source and creator, who God is. So my question that I've been pondering is, if the Bible reflects who Jesus is Jesus a full, and I mean that by intentionally using the word full, is Jesus a full expression of who God is? There's my question. An absolutely full expression.
You kind of got to ask that for the whole Trinity then, right?
I guess so.
Right?
I guess so.
If Jesus is Jesus one-to-one with God the Father, is the Spirit. I mean, we kind of in some ways believe they've revealed themselves at least to be, I don't know, I think that's one of the questions I don't think we may never know, and it may take forever to find out. But I think at least as it relates to humanity, they have revealed different aspects. I mean, I think one of the things I kind of wrote down is I saw some of the mirrors that Jesus, the John 14, if you know me, you know the Father, right?
Right.
So if they were truly one and the same, we probably already know the Father. But I think in a way, Jesus's purpose was to act as that window into the fury and awe that the Israelites maybe initially saw from God. The earthquake on the mountain and the fire of, the pillar of fire and stuff like that. And I think Jesus is a way for us to be able to connect. And so they're, asking, are they alike or not? I don't know that we'll know, but I think they've presented themselves at least differently to humanity.
Sure. I definitely see Jesus as a facet of God at the very, very least. A facet that has been almost, and I don't mean to say this to dumb down God. It's more of a case of trying to articulate that I'm dumbing down us. He's been lowered to our level so that we have the best way of understanding God by representing himself in a man named Jesus. And to that end, there is still mystery in that. There is still incomprehensibility in that. And
so after you're done talking, I got a question.
Yeah, so there is still incomprehensibility in that. And so it's almost like a book that we're reading that we have to continue engaging in this in order to try and just get a little bit of light. Like watching a movie once, you see something, watching it twice, you see something that you never saw before 3 times, and you're like, whoa, I never saw this. And it's kind of that experience for me. John, you wanted to
so when you said, is Jesus fully God? I think you have to say yes, but then that's a tough one to wrap your mind around. And so what the thought that came to my mind, and it's interesting, a lot of it had to do with what I was reading at the time when I read through this the first time, but the thought that came to my mind is a child more fully human than an adult or not? And then the interesting part, the part that just kind of hit me like a thunderbolt, was that Jesus called us to be like a little child, totally open, totally honest, totally unabashed. And in some ways, that's what Jesus was, if you were willing to do that. Whereas as we become adults, we become further from being godlike than even a little child is, because we can become more closed and unwilling to, take that step that would potentially shame us and make us feel worse about ourselves than we already feel. Does any of that make sense?
No, it does. That's an excellent analogy, because immediately when you said it, I was like, yeah, of course a child is fully human. But then, and the reality is, what I realize is that there is maturity that the child takes on as the years go by. And in the same respect, I think there is an image of God that matures over the years within our minds as we grow with him, as we connect with him. It's not that God needs to mature, it's that we develop a more mature perspective of him. I do not believe in the same God that I did 10 years ago.
True.
And I think that's a good thing. It shows that I have grown so much. Do you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, no, I think my answer is yes to the question, did Jesus fully reveal God? And my answer is yes, in that, essentially, dying on the cross, that sacrifice, self-sacrificing love, that is who God is. That is his essential, that's his essence. I mean, that's who he is, right? So in that way, I mean, there are many other attributes of God, but that is the core of who God is, and that's what Jesus revealed. So in that sense, I think that Jesus fully revealed who the Father God is.
Right, definitely. So maybe this hopefully links as we segue into chapter 3, the final chapter of reflection for us today, the divine attributes. And maybe let me give a working definition that A.W. Tozer offers. The divine attributes are what we know about God, but God does not possess them as qualities. They are how God is as he reveals himself to his creatures. I thought this was an interesting chapter. I think he was, I'm going to try and quote, page 25, when he says at the top of page 25, this was interesting to me. He says, we must break ourselves of the habit of thinking of the Creator as we think of his creatures. That kind of really just came out to me in a, I wondered if we do this. Well, A.W. Tozer is pushing the notion that we do, but I actually had a think and wondered, do I actually do this? And I guess there are times where I find that I relate to God in the way that I relate to others. And I don't think it's totally a wrong thing, but neither do I don't think it's a totally a fully right thing to express who God is. It's just the fact that I'm a human. I've been created this way, and I perceive and engage in my emotions and relationships in the way that I do. So it's kind of natural that I would see and visualize God in similar fashions because of that. But I think that God has the power to come and relate to me when I consider that there are other ways that God can be revealed. Like he has the ability to relate to me in the way that I relate to other human beings, and he has the ability to relate to me beyond that and push me to the understanding that he can be related. I feel like I've been a bit confusing. Did I make sense at all?
So I appreciate you struggling with this.
Okay.
Because A.W. Tozer starts out by basically saying God is limited in our minds because of our own imagination and ability to describe that. And that's what you're struggling with right now. Honestly, in this chapter, he was struggling with this too. I'm just like, well, wait a minute. You just said, and now you're saying you're falling into your own trap kind of a thing.
Yeah, definitely. Did anyone else get any clarity, or were you just as struggling along with Tozer like I was?
I liked page 25, that third paragraph, where the second sentence starts out where man is both created and made. And how we were created, how we were brought from nothing to something is something only God can understand. I don't think we as humans can understand that. But how we are made is exactly what you said. I'm not the same Christian I was 10 years ago. My view of God is not the same. It's God working in me through his spirit and my life experiences that makes me the Christian I am now. And 10 years from now, hopefully I'll be a much more mature Christian and hopefully a better Christian in some ways. I think that's what we're struggling with God. There's parts of God that are just unknown, but Jesus brought what was important to be known, that we can insert into our experiences and grow with.
Right.
And that's what he wanted very much. I mean, that's what he did with his disciples. That's what he did with, it seems like almost every person he met that was open to that.
Any other reflections? I do have a question that I've been pondering, but I want to give an opportunity for other people to.
So when he was talking about how we should reject, describing God using the word like traits or characteristics.
Right.
I get that. I understand, because like you said, God does not change. Whereas we are constantly changing. We're depending on situations, our emotions, our experience, whatever it is. But the core of God, the God as love, that does not change. I know that, there's plenty of stories in the Bible that does not look like God is loving, right, at all. But we also understand that what happened with, especially with the Israelites and early on, and that had to all do with his great plan, and also because of his love, trying to, find a way or implement his plan to save this humanity. So that was also coming from love. But we just cannot, just try to understand God from our human perspective. It just doesn't, it's yes, we can experience God using our emotions and all of that experience, but at the same time, you can't say God is this way today because of I feel this way or because I experienced this.
No, it makes sense. It begs me to ask the question. So, sorry, Matt, I know you wanted to say
Go
something.
ahead.
I'll just respond to say my natural response is, so give up then. Don't do it. And therefore, what therefore is the expectation of this God from me? And I think the uncomfortable answer is not to understand him, but to relate to him, which are two different things.
They're two different things. I agree.
Matt, did I bring you off course, or if you?
No, it's all good, and I may be on my own track here anyway. So I feel like when I read this third chapter, what came to mind was actually what was in the last chapter, where he literally says, left to ourselves, we tend to immediately reduce God to manageable terms. I feel like everything that I'm interested to really see where this book goes. I've not read the whole thing yet, and so I'm really interested to see where it goes, because it seems like he's wanting to give us this picture of a high, awesome view of God, but he is so just deep in the academic weeds here of trying to structure and define all the terms about how we can, let's give the rules of the road for how we're going to do this. And he admits himself, we can't do that. We run up against it. And I totally agree with that. I think we so often in religion and our own lives and wherever, it's a matter of trying to box God in. And
but it's safer that way, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
I feel more comfortable that way. Yeah.
He is absolutely, that was probably my favorite thing when I read in this whole thing, is that it's how we control God. I mean, it's safer. We know what to expect. It's great, right? And we do it personally. Religions do it. It's all about that. And so, yeah, he's picked a challenging topic to write and try to, dig into some of this stuff, because, to inherently lay out ground rules, you run the risk of putting a box that's just a little bit too small for God, and suddenly you've cut off all of this wonder that's out here. And so I don't know, I'll be interested.
God likes to break out of those boxes, doesn't he?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even if we don't, even if we don't.
Yeah. And so, Tozer saying we got to have this big, huge box and don't restrain them, but we're going to restrain them by saying we can't call it this. We have to call it this, because
I have a feeling that Tozer's encouraging us even to get rid of the box, which is even more uncomfortable.
Right. And I'm, again, totally down with it, but at least kind of this early chapters, it seems like he's.
Well, I'm with you, Matt.
Yeah.
I am totally down with it, but I don't even know what that fully means, to be totally down with a boxless God. Because if, let's just be frank, the boxless God is probably more scary than I've ever thought. Not in terms of I fear him, he's going to kill. No, just more scary in terms of he is larger, wider, smaller, more macro, more micro than I've ever even thought that he could be.
And
And
there's
that's
a reason there's so much we refer to God as a fearful God, an angry God. And there are elements, and they're probably imperfect words, but that idea that it is so big is terrifying in some ways. I mean,
sure.
It's like being out in the middle of the ocean in a rowboat, there's
and yet still he invites us to connect with him.
Right. Yeah.
You wanted to say something, Dee?
No, okay, so on page 26, right, on the second paragraph, it says the doctrine of the divine unity means not only that there is but one God, it means also that God is simple and uncomplex. So I feel like this is like everything that is opposite of what Matt just said and what you just said, Pastor Sam.
Yeah, but
and you know what?
But it's still true though. Go on.
Yeah.
So the thing is, okay, I know, I mean, I'm sure you guys realize this, that I tend to make things very simple. I mean, but in my mind, I keep things very simple. Okay. So I feel like this. I feel like God is simple and he's not complex as we'd like to make it out him to be, because I mean, essentially he's love. And I understand that everything is driven by love for him, unselfish, self-sacrificing love, which is completely opposite of us. And we try to understand God through our own self-serving, selfish love, right? Self-love. That's why we just don't understand it. And we think that he's so complex, right? And God, like we talked about, he's inviting us to become like child. Yes, childlike in faith, but also I think it also must mean childlike in being simple and not complex. It's just
that makes sense. Even though it goes against what we said, it does make sense, and that kind of brings us to the end on the cliffhanger. As we continue.
Why is John laughing?
Because there's so much. There's so much.
We all have more we could say, and we
yeah.
can
I know. Why we can't get this in 30 minutes?
But hopefully, Tozer kind of. He's already way out here, and hopefully he can narrow it and give us some direction.
Well, this is the introduction. The introduction of how exciting this is. I think he's introducing into the complex in complex God, the wide and the simple God as well. And that's what's exciting. We're going to dive deeper into this more. I'm sorry that we've kind of had to limit the conversation, but it helps to really just continue to reflect as we grow with this. Next week, we are going to dive into 3 more chapters, chapter 4, 5, and 6, and somehow squeeze that conversation into another 30 minutes as we grow together.
Yeah, did you look at the titles? It's the Holy Trinity.
Oh, there we go. There we go. So some of our questions.
And simple to let's talk about the Holy Trinity.
so join us next week as we are confused even more. You can join us on as we read together. John, could you show the book again for us? We are reading The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer. We're stretching our minds, trying our best, stretching or simplifying our mind, D, trying our best to understand this walk together. You have an opportunity, dear listener, to join us on the journey. Order the book on Kindle or just get it delivered to you and come and read along with us. Next week, chapter 4, 5, and 6, and we look forward to spending time with you. But from us, this is us building a good evening to you all. This is Matt, John, D, and myself, Sam, wishing you the best and see you next week. God bless you. Bye.